The CEO of Illinois Policy, John Tillman's on the line. John, good morning to you.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Great to have you along with us. Let's talk a little right to work. There's a study out that's making a few waves.
Well, I don't even think of it as right to work. Oh, that's a great name. It's really about empowering workers to choose what groups they want to join, what groups they don't want to join. Now, we couldn't force you to join the Democrat or Republican Party or the Communist Party or the Rotary Club or the Chamber. But state law forces workers to join the union even if they don't want to. And the union is a private organization. That's not fair to workers, and we think that should change.
Now, Governor Rauner likely will talk about this during his State of the State address today. He has said during the campaign, and I think has said since being elected, he's not pushing necessarily for a right-to-work legislation for the whole state, but he talks about these empowerment zones, these areas where local municipalities could enact what he calls worker empowerment zones, kind of a smaller version of what would be a statewide plan. It's at least a decent first step, I would guess.
Well, what I love about this idea is that it lets each locality decide for themselves what's best for their community and their workers, and lets the workers themselves participate in the process in an open and transparent way. So Cook County wants to keep it the way it is, they can keep it the way it is. But if the counties around Cook or out in Rockford or wherever else you want to go decide, you know what, let's try a new way to do things. We're losing manufacturing jobs and the workers that are part of that. We're losing jobs in just practically about every category of work we have in the state. Let's try something new and see if we can't find an approach. And let's say Rockford became, had a worker empowerment zone that let workers choose, and suddenly you had growth there. I think that would be an interesting signal to the rest of the state.
And we've seen in other cases where that sort of thing is put forth, and we think about the hostess situation more times than not, which is, okay, we're going to need some changes, we're going to need some concessions. No, you know what? We would rather see this company die than budge 1 inch.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the great tragedies is the way it ends up going to the mat, where the unions, especially union leadership's interest, begins to be at odds with its own members' interest, which is job security and future prosperity. And, of course, that's also at odds with the company's own interest. And when you start to have work rules, I remember in that particular case, the way they had to do the delivery trucks, the number of drivers they had to have, they wouldn't let them adapt and have some flexibility on how they deliver their product, so they could not be competitive on their logistics cost, and they ended up shutting down for that and other reasons. And that is what is bad when you have monopoly control of a private organization over a labor force. Collective bargaining, the right to organize, nobody's saying that shouldn't happen. We're simply saying that you shouldn't be able to essentially Shanghai workers into a union unless they opt in of their own free will. And the workers should be empowered to make that choice as to what union they join, just as they're empowered to decide what business to go work for.
John Tillman with us, Illinois Policy. He's the CEO. It's Riley and Scott here on WROK. People are reacting, especially on the labor side, John, as if this is some sort of really wacky, far out there kind of idea. But it's not as if we don't have examples of what's happened in some of these states that have right to work. 24 states, about half the country, if my math is right, have right to work laws in place. Their economies were growing faster than non-right to work states in the past decade or so. What other lessons can we learn from those states that have enacted right to work legislation?
What you learn is that employers want to locate their job-creating businesses in right-to-work states because it gives them greater flexibility. Now, what the unions say is that workers don't have as good a deal in those states. That's just not factually true. A lot of these states are the states from the South and Mid-South, as well as the states right next door like Iowa and Indiana. So they're all over the country. And when you adjust for cost of living, because it's obviously a lot cheaper to live in, say, Texas than it is Illinois, right-to-work states where workers are empowered have actually higher incomes, and those incomes are growing faster. A really good example of that is Illinois used to rank as high as 6th in household income, and we're down to around 13th or 14th. And Texas, which used to be a backwater, low-income state, has just passed us in household income, and they're a right-to-work state. So there are some lessons here, I think, for all of us. And, there's a lot of hue and cry about this, but the other thing is it's popular. It's popular with Democrats. It's popular with Republicans. It's popular with independents. About in the mid-70s, roughly 73 to 74% want workers to have a choice, want workers to be empowered.
And, I'm looking over some of the whys and wherefores of the story. You have some of the usual suspects jumping up saying, this is the worst possible thing that could ever be done for the state of Illinois. But, if you apply that principle to so many other things, I'm not drawing any benefit from it, and I don't ask it for anything and all that, but I still have to pay. You wouldn't want that in other aspects of your life, but they seem to think it's perfectly okay with this.
Well, exactly, and I think, for example, in a business where you have workers that have a right to whether to not to join the union doesn't have to negotiate on those workers' behalf. They can let them go and be free. What they're doing is dragging those workers along and saying we get to collectively bargain for every single worker in the business. Well, okay, release those workers who don't want to be part of the union. Only negotiate for those who are members of your union. Let those workers who opt out, who want to be empowered, let them be empowered to negotiate with the business owner and make their own deal. No, there's nothing wrong with that, and we don't blame them for that. Heck, I wouldn't want to be negotiating on behalf of somebody that wasn't part of my group, so let them be on their own. That's fine. They don't have to have a free rider problem. But the other thing about this is that manufacturing jobs and unionized jobs are actually growing a little bit faster in right-to-work states. And one of the reasons is, in these right-to-work states, unions can still organize, but they don't organize with monopoly control of the worker. So what ends up happening is the unions end up serving the workers better because they have to earn their trust. And so some of the workers in those states are choosing to unionize because they're being served well, because they have choice.
John Tillman with us, CEO, Illinois Policy, IllinoisPolicy.org. I want to go back and repeat this. This is, I think, the biggest misconception when right to work starts getting talked about. In fact, there's a pretty prominent Springfield blogger that wrote an entire column on a false premise, which is that there's the free riders. Unions have to represent you, even if you don't want to be part of the union. That's not true. There's no. What happens is, as you point out, John, unions get certain perks and advantages when they agree to represent everyone, even if they don't want to be a part of the union, and that's why they do it that way. But this free ride thing is a total myth.
Exactly. They are the ones choosing to bring along the free riders, and we don't like to call them free riders. They're dragged along. We would rather not be dragged along. It's the union that's dragging them along onto the ride. Let the union let them go.
So, the forces against this have been marshaled, and usually are marshaled, ready for it anyway, and are very strong, and are really, getting the message forth that, that they fight this through tooth and nail. We're seeing, a lot of the Democrats who populate Springfield jumping aboard this as well. How do you think it progresses from here?
Well, I think we're going to have a very good debate about this, just like we are on your show this morning. Here's the bottom line, is the unions don't want people to be free to vote whether or not they want their community to be have empowerment zones. But when it comes to organizing a union, they want workers to be able to vote. So I think that's very interesting. It's like they want to lock workers inside a Berlin Wall that once you're inside it, you can never get out of it. That's unfair. It's un-American. You can't lock people in. Unions are a great part of American history, and what makes unionization great is when it serves workers. And it serves workers when those workers have a right to opt in or opt out. And what the opposition is saying is once you're in, you can never get out. That is not fair. It's undemocratic, and so I think it's a good debate. Workers should have the choice, not the union bosses who benefit from forced unionization, and that's the bottom line. They benefit from forced unionization. In right-to-work states, the union bosses actually make a little less money, but the workers do a little bit better, and I think that's what maybe the union bosses are really focused on.
John Tillman, Illinois Policy, IllinoisPolicy.org, or .com. What do I not remember that is? It's org. I had it right the first time, IllinoisPolicy.org. The Illinois, perhaps the worker empowerment zones that Governor Rauner is likely to propose, based closely, or at least resembling closely, what is happening in Kentucky. You've got 5 Kentucky counties using home rule powers to do a similar thing. Are we seeing results? Are we seeing what's happening in Kentucky with a similar kind of philosophy?
That's exactly right. And we have been contacted by people all over the state who know about Kentucky and are very, very excited about this. You think about places outside of the Chicago metropolitan area, there are great struggles. I grew up in rural Michigan. I've been here 30 years, but I grew up in a very tiny town in rural Michigan, and I travel all over the state, and it is very hard to attract businesses in downstate, central, and southern Illinois. And one of the ways to do it, of course, is to try to find every possible advantage you could have. We have an empowerment zone experiment going on right now, right here in Illinois and right nearby, because right next door to Illinois, all along that Indiana border, That's an empowerment zone where there's right to work.
Mm-hmm.
And there are businesses every day moving across that line, 50, 60 miles, 40 miles, to benefit from that, where they have better conditions for their workers, where workers have choices, and jobs are growing over there. And so that experiment is clearly working to the benefit of Indiana, but people all over the state are saying, hey, how about we do that right here in our community along the Indiana border, but on this side of the border? That excites me. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for the people all across the state outside of Chicago.
And, John, we also have that happening in the Quad Cities, which is almost a better experiment because they're the Quad Cities. I mean, there's 4 cities right next to each other, half on the Illinois side, half on the Iowa side. And I've seen a lot of stories about people picking up and moving from the Illinois side to the Iowa side. That's only a span of maybe 5 miles
Right.
due to economic conditions.
That's a really, really good example. I drive over to Iowa all the time and pass through there, and when you get on to the Iowa side, there's a lot more feeling of robustness, growth, things popping up every time.
He's John Tillman. He's the CEO of Illinois Policy, illinoispolicy.org. You can go to that site often and learn lots of different things. As always, John, we appreciate you taking time out of your morning for us.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.